right, good afternoon. I know you just had lunch, so thank you for choosing us to take your after lunch nap. We really appreciate it. I am McKayla LaBorde, and as she mentioned, I'm the Executive Director of Student Services at ESU 3. Couple of housekeeping items before we get started. There's a QR code. I believe this one works. It's fine. Everything's fine. I'm fine. And then a bit.ly as well that will take you to a PDF of the slides. So I've had a lot of hi Zoomers. Just want to say hi, anyone joining us virtually. Hi, Katie. And I'm sure there's massive crowds out there we just don't know about, right? I did have several people ask me if I was nervous about the presentation today. And I said, you know, I was not until I found out it was being recorded. And I'm going to tell you right now, I have a hard time not using profanity. And now that I know it's being recorded, I am going to work really hard. Like my cognitive load is going to be working overtime because it's really hard for me not to cuss. But I'm going to do my very best, So, all right. So did everybody get a chance to get these? Okay, awesome. All right. So first, I want to tell you a little bit about myself, and then I'm going to pass it off to Kayla, and then we'll tell you about ESU 3. So I had like 72 majors in college because my parents were both in education, and I was very certain that that's not what I wanted to do until I realized that's exactly what I wanted to do. My dad was the first special ed director in North Platte Public Schools, like first ever, right? Back in the 70s before PL 94-142. And I ended up majoring in secondary special education and graduated and signed a contract for my first teaching gig out in Palm Springs, California. So just FYI, that is not near the ocean. It's in a desert, but that's fine. It was fine. But I took off across the country and worked in some really awesome places, middle school, and then moved to San Diego and taught in high school there as well. So my experiences in the classroom were at the secondary level, and I love secondary. Like, I know we're kind of prickly, but I love it, and it's near and dear to my heart. So got my administrative degree and kind of started working through the ranks of special education, moved back to Omaha, Nebraska's the good life, landed in Millard Public Schools. I was a behavior consultant pre-K through 21 for 4 years there. And then a gig in Papillion La Vista opened up, and I was a secondary supervisor for special services there. I love that job. But I had no idea what ESUs really even were or how much I would love them. And so I've now been at ESU 3, which is the Omaha area ESU for, this is my 6th year. It's the longest I've ever stayed in a job. So that's exciting for my boss, I'm sure. But really, really love it and love the work that we get to do. So I will let Kayla tell a little bit about her journey.
My name is Kayla Payton. I always discount my 2 years as a paraeducator as not years of education. But so I was a paraeducator for 2 years at Keller Middle School in Lincoln Public Schools. And then also I am a recovering long-term middle school educator. I taught 9 years in intervention reading. I did 2 years as an instructional facilitator and 5 years as a dean of students at McMillan Magnet Center that's in North Omaha. So all of my years were within OPS except for my LPS years. So about 20 years of education. And I now am housed out of ESU 3, and McKayla is actually one of my supervisors, and just want to say I'm thankful for this opportunity, and she knows that. Hopefully she knows that on a daily basis. And one little tiny story about her is when I was, well, this is how I know you care, because we were in the first session today, he was talking about taking care of yourselves. And one of those ways that I like to take care of myself is to have sessions with McKayla. But this is how I knew that the fit was right for me, is after they had made the decision and offered me the position, she asked me twice if I was ready to give up being with kids. And I said, yes, I'm ready. But I really wasn't. I lied. Yeah, it's tough. In about a year, I'm about a year and a half out of schools, and I do miss kids, but I love the work that I do, and I love the people that I work with at ESU 3. Yeah, even you, Scott.
All right, so ESU 3, as I mentioned, is in the Omaha area. We serve 4 counties, 18 school districts. So it's everything in that 4-county area outside of Omaha Public Schools, which is its own ESU. We have 5,000 plus educators and more than 85,000 students in our region. So I love ESU 3. We have school districts that have a couple hundred kids, all the way up to Miller Public Schools that has 24,000. So it's a super fun and it's super fun. It's a great place to be though. And I love my work at ESU 3. I want to say hi really quick to Dr. Scott Bloom. He is in the back and I told him I would point him out. He is the Executive Director of Professional Learning. And so his team and he have been great partners in this work. So let's talk about this work. So, the space theme, by the way, right? Like it? Okay, cool, thanks. So, Captain's Log. Oh, and by the way, I guess it's also a Star Trek reference, but I'm more of a Star Wars person. So I'm sorry if you came here expecting any Star Trek references. You will be disappointed, but we're gonna start with the Captain's Log. So why MTSS at the secondary? Well, I don't have to go into great detail to tell you that we know we have some pretty deeply embedded structures at the secondary level that often make it difficult to change, right? Secondary school wasn't even required when it was kind of all thought up, right? You went to school. We heard about it this morning in the keynote. Sometimes kids only went to school up through 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th grade. And so it was a real privilege to be able to go to a high school. And really, there have not really been that like major shifts in how we serve students at the secondary level. But we also know that when a student receives an F in high school, they are way more likely to drop out of high school and thus way more likely to live in poverty and way more likely to have complex health issues. And the list goes on and on and on. And so while sometimes it was, I was seeing across the state and in my region, elementaries were like, woo, MTSS, let's do it, right? And super excited to come to the table. We were struggling to get secondaries on board and engaged in the work of MTSS. And so the why, of course, is the students and the gravity of the situation, but just thinking outside the box of how to reach these secondary schools. So up on the screen is Dr. Judy Elliott. She's a professional crush of mine. It's wildly inappropriate, but she is someone I saw speak at the Nebraska MTSS Summit like 4 or 5 years ago. And I heard her and she said things that just made sense to me with my secondary lens and says it in a way that's no nonsense, right? Like, secondary staff sometimes maybe don't enjoy icebreakers, right? The fluff and the buff and the icing. So she says it like it is and just has a way of speaking to folks. And I think in a way that helps secondary people get it. And so I heard her speak, reached out. I was like, hey, we got this issue. Like elementaries are signing up for MTSS, secondaries, could kind of take it or leave it. And so we started to talk about how to really engage in this work in our region. So she has been a huge partner and I really need to give her a lot of credit. Some of the things I just like walk around saying now are because she says them. And I've heard her say them so many times, I just say them too. So I want to make sure and give credit where credit is due. Judy has a lot of insight and just wonderful expertise in this area. And she's been a big part of this. So we had support from Nebraska MTSS. We knew we wanted to build capacity at the ESU level. And that might, for folks who are in districts, be kind of commensurate to building capacity at your district level. But there are times where people are maybe afraid to tell secondary what to do, right? I mean, oh wait, do I have any high school principals in here? Oh, okay. I love you guys. I love you. But I'm going to tell you right now, I don't walk around telling high school principals what to do. Do you? Not so much. So we really needed to build the capacity for coaching so that our district folks and our ESU folks could kind of serve in that role and help secondaries along the process. It's really going to need to be driven by general education. And so while I'm super passionate about this, and it's an area that I love, I've often had to kind of let the reins move over to my general ed friends. And we have some great partners. I would like to mention Dr. Aaron Bradenkamp, who's in Scott's PLD department at the ESU. He's a huge driving force behind this. And thanks to Scott for giving him the time and space to work on this project together. He's a former secondary administrator too, so he's a good partner. And then finally, we started to think about the structure for the series. So the one thing I would say is that in our work with secondary MTSS, everyone loves a good rah-rah. Like, wasn't this morning's keynote great for your heart and a great reminder? And then you go back and you've got discipline issues and you've got course grades and you need to do this and that and the other thing. And so what we found is, well, we loved bringing in big national experts. ESUs do that all the time, right? We love it. It's fantastic. But then what? And so we wanted to do something different. We wanted to have that national expert involved, but at a deeper level. And we wanted a larger commitment to this process because high schools are like that cruise boat that's really hard to turn sometimes, high schools and middle schools. And so it was important to us to recognize that we were gonna need more than 1 year to do this. So what we've kind of put together is an effort over 3 years, 4 days of in-person learning, which we're gonna talk to you about a little bit, and coaching and sessions in between to kind of get this work done. So I just wanted you to have a little bit of the context before we jumped into the content. So, Kayla, anything I'm missing?
And just for a little more context, we want to hear from you before we get going. If you would go ahead and get your phones out, because we want to hear from you. We want to hear from you about what are the barriers that you've either seen or that you can think of implementing MTSS at the secondary level. So go ahead and scan the code or go to menti.com, and the code is 1397-0271, but it's up there. So just go ahead and start giving us some of the barriers you've faced that might be an issue at the secondary level, middle school and high school, and tell us what's either going on or what can you imagine. I'll go ahead and switch over there. Ooh, look at that staff buy-in. How about that? Time, absolutely. We don't want one more thing. Schedule issues. Look at that, McKayla. Oh. Staff commitment, absolutely. Lack of district guidance, principals, buy-in. Too many teachers, hard to get teams created. Oh, look at that. Staff ownership, I love that. Finding interventions that motivate students, definitely. Teachers feel like it is more geared towards elementary. Interestingly enough, I don't know how we came up with this, McKayla, through definite research and our findings throughout the entire process. But what you are all saying is basically what we are going to cover today. A lot of staffing, a lot of schedule, a lot of time issues. A large part of it is definitely buy-in. And so hopefully we can give you some ideas, some tips, some tools, some tricks to help you go around those things or tackle them head on. Because a lot of the times when we're working with secondary, it's all about having those crucial conversations and just making sure we're looking at what's going on in reality and what we can make better. So what we want to address first is when we're talking about secondary MTSS, we come up with a lot of challenges. So those of you who talked about time and staffing and schedule changes, we have two different categories when it comes to challenges, and they are adaptive versus technical. If you have never heard of this before, I'll talk about it real quick, but technical challenges are those challenges that are simple to fix. It can be an easy schedule change. It can be just giving teachers more time, creating more meetings. I know we all like more meetings, but it's basically that logistics, that staffing, that funding. That technical challenge is easy to fix. Then we have the adaptive challenge. The adaptive challenge is all about sliding into that growth mindset. And that is tough for a lot of secondary teachers. Again, just so you remember, I spent 16 years at the middle school level. And even at the middle school level, especially our 8th grade teachers, they like to say, well, we're getting them ready for high school. What does that even mean? So at the middle school and the high school level, it's all about change and how change is scary. For those of you who know about change theory, the first thing that happens when you are about to change or when you do change is a cycle of grief because you're losing something that's familiar to you, something that you've always done. But when we're working with our secondary schools, it's all about facing that grief and saying, it's okay. I know you're scared. We're scared too. Let's work through this together. Let's come up with solutions that are feasible and information that comes in bite-sized pieces. Got that? Yeah, all right. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to shift from a Star Trek theme to a Mythbusters theme. And we're gonna bust the myths that you were talking about just in our Menti. So let's bust some myths. Myth, oh no. It's like, yeah, myth 1, go ahead.
Okay, so yes, we are going to talk about all those things, you guys. And you're probably sitting out there going, okay, can you just tell us how to do it? Yeah, so it's not that easy, right? It's just not. And it's complex and there's a lot of moving parts. And so I know that maybe that was painful. Maybe you enjoyed it thoroughly. Either way, that foundation and setting the scene for this is really important. So, so thank you for going through that. Now, let's talk about this. Everyone talks about secondary staff buy-in, right? Hear it all the time. Well, staff's not going to buy into that. And I'm going to tell you, even after 2 and 3 years of working with school teams, we still get it. Like, even if the school leadership team, which we're going to talk about here in a minute, is like on board and they're actually rah-rahing MTSS at that point, they're afraid about what the rest of the building is going to say. So staff buy-in is a real thing. And so when we started trying to figure out, like, what does that mean? What does that mean? We started thinking about, like, what do staff believe? So if they believe in something, we figured they buy into it. So the first step in examining the beliefs is just making people aware of what they believe. So the first thing we do when we take a team on is we have them take a beliefs survey. There are a ton out there. We used one from the University of South Florida. Nebraska MTSS has one as well, which is linked here. But it asks questions, like really important questions. And well, such as, I believe all kids can learn. And I know that seems super simple, but at the same time, that's an important question to ask. You know, Judy Elliott, she talks about purple-haired kids because it's a real neutral way to talk about subgroups. And so she talks about, yeah, of course all kids can learn, except for the purple-haired kids, right? Everybody knows the purple-haired kids aren't going to learn. So I hope they live, for the love of God. But will they learn? That's the real question. So, you know, this idea of examining beliefs is super important. Another question in the belief survey is, I believe with effective core instruction that 80% of kids should get it. Like, do I actually believe that? We know that's supposed to be true. We talk about that all the time. If we have great core instruction at tier 1, then 80% of kids are going to be mastering standards. Like, is that happening? Do I actually believe that? So we administer the belief survey, and then we look at it. We look at it in their team. So it's not calling anybody out, but they can see the belief survey, and it's interesting. And then we do this data-driven dialogue protocol. So we have like a specific set of questions we use, takes a team through examining the beliefs of the building. And so this is where we start. We have to baseline this information because we want to see if we're making a difference. And we have to be aware of what the beliefs are in the building to start. So that's important. The next thing that Judy taught us to do is to ask 2 really basic questions, okay? First question, are you happy with your data? Like, pretty simple. It's not convoluted, not complex. Are you happy with your data? Adolph talked about it this morning. What is excellence? Are we better than last year? Are we better than last month? Are we better than last week? Are we better than yesterday, right? So are we happy with our data? The second question, and I love asking this question to secondary folks, is every classroom in this building one that you would put your own flesh and blood in? Your kid, your grandkid, your goddaughter. Is every classroom in this building one that you would put your own flesh and blood in? So if you can't answer yes to both of those questions, then we probably have some work to do. So we focus on those questions because I think they're easy and secondary teachers can relate to them. And I think we all know that chemistry teacher down the hall that you would not want to put your own kiddo in. We all know that's happening, right? So how do we get to the heart of that? And how do we make some real change? So we use that data-driven dialogue. We're really trying to build that understanding and shared commitment. We're not selling anything. I mean, okay, sometimes I am. I love MTSS and I want people to do it. But at the end of the day, teams got to make the decision. Schools have to make the decision on their own that they want to do this. Because you know how it goes when you try to we talked about earlier, making a principal do something. No, thank you, right? They have to believe it's best for their school. And it can't just be resting on that principal's shoulders. It has to be a shared commitment by the building. So an MTSS mindset is something we're gunning for, right? MTSS mindset. So this is the way we combat that idea that secondary staff won't buy in. They care about kids. They will buy in. They will. You got to show them it works, and you got to show them what's in it for them, right? MTSS mindset also means we are debunking the myth of average. Kayla's going to talk about that.
Okay, so this is actually one of the first things that we hit our teams with when they come to us is the myth of the average student. So just so you have these resources, I don't have them on the slides, but there is a man named James McPherson, and he wrote The End of Average. And then on the previous slide, there's an 18-minute video that was done to summarize the study and then to talk about how we can apply it to education. So the gist of the study was in the 1940s, the Air Force, their pilots were having trouble controlling the airplanes, okay? They were having a ton of trouble. They were losing control. They were crashing. In fact, yes, I had to get this for you guys. On the worst day, there were 17 separate plane crashes. They couldn't figure it out. Why were our pilots crashing? Why can't they control their planes that they are flying? They are well-trained individuals, correct? Yeah. So what they found is that when the companies who were creating the planes and creating the cockpits, what they did is they built a profile of the average pilot, okay? So they took things like weight, height, circumference of head. This will come back a little bit later. They took things like the chest breadth, the leg length, like all of those things, and they made a profile of the average pilot. Interestingly enough, after this had happened, they took a lineup of 4,063 pilots, and no single pilot matched all the characteristics of the average pilot. Does that make sense to you? there is no such thing as average when you're stacking up all the variables, right? So the theory behind that is a system designed around the average person is doomed to fail. So let's take a look at the average student. When you think about students, you want to think about their readiness level, their ability level, but then also what are their interests, like vocabulary, do they love reading, do they hate math, and then things like memory, what kind of language devices do they have, how is their cognitive levels, are they curious about certain subjects? And yeah, we can have that line down the middle of the average student, but they're going to be all over the place when it comes to where they are on the spectrum, right? And thinking about also, our MTSS triangle, right? We're going to have kids that will need just core instruction and they'll be okay. But someone like my 9-year-old daughter, she needs a little extra help when it comes to managing her own emotions. So she might be a tier 2 on some days, tier 3 on some days. But cognitively, she's high ability. So she's tier 1. Wait, high ability students also need tiers as well. So we don't have an average student. So what we would like you to do real quick, because we've been talking to you or talking at you for quite a bit, I want you to take what I just told you about the 1940s Air Force study and what we do or how we teach to the average student. And let's not, I almost forgot. When we create or when materials are created for us, those high quality instructional materials are great, but sometimes they are designed to the average kids. When we're teaching in our classrooms, we're teaching to the middle. Does that make sense? So let's apply that to our practices. Let's turn and talk, reflect and share. I'm going to have you reflect for about 30 seconds. So you can share on one of these or all of these if you want to. So why might be there no such thing as the average student? Do our practices generally tend to teach the middle? And what is the current reality of your school or district? So take about 30-second think time. Okay, I didn't do a quiet signal today, but I will bring it back in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you so much. I know it's after lunch and we're getting kind of restless as adults, so it's great. We actually do want to hear from you. So from 2 groups or 2 different people, what's kind of on your mind when we're talking about the myth of average, when we're talking about our high school kids? Is anybody like to be brave enough to share? What were you talking about? No? We didn't help you at all? Okay, wait time. Okay.
So I'm at a district level and I'll spend time in our elementary classrooms, middle school classrooms, and high school classrooms. And there's a little bit of a belief in our district that our middle school students and our high school students aren't capable of doing the work at their grade level. And so we're seeing much more rigorous instruction happening in our elementary classrooms. And then they're going to middle school and they're listening to a lot of text. They're not doing a lot of reading, but our elementary teachers are really, trying to make sure that kids have those opportunities. So it, in some cases, would be an improvement if we taught to the middle. Yeah. Okay. All right. That's fair. That's fair. Thank you.
Yes.
Sorry.
So I probably don't need a mic.
Oh, come on.
Okay, I'll do it for the Zoom people. We talked about the fact that at secondary, you have your students for 47 minutes. So what is the average for that kid? I taught in the English classroom. So were they an average English student or were they an average kid? Or what do they do in math? I don't know. What do they look like at 9 in the morning? I don't know. I get them from 9:15 to 10 o'clock. And so even looking at an average student at the secondary level, you have such a limited view of who that child really is because you know them in your content, not overall.
Yes, absolutely.
Wonderful. Thank you all for sharing. I know there's big problems. So it's good that you came to this session. Way to go.
To your point, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but in our 3 years of cycle so far, we have spent the first 2 years really focusing on core tier 1 instruction and really strengthening that and focusing on what are our high yield strategies. So we always say year 1 is tier 1. So stay tuned for that. And talking about only knowing our students for one subject area, important. And we will also talk about that scheduling piece of creating or carving out that time so teachers can get together and actually have that purposeful and meaningful conversation for those kiddos. And I will tell you, yes, it is possible at the high school level. It just takes a little bit of thinking outside the box. At the middle level, so being from the middle level for 16 years, it was super duper easy for us because, you know, when our kids went to their electives or their specials, that was a time when we got together. But then we miss those specials teachers. So it takes a little bit of finagling, if you will. All right, so another thing that we do is kind of an onboarding process that's kind of unique to ESU 3. So what we do is we require that the building principal be a part of the MTSS team, and that we also require, or we would like, a district representative. So it could be the curriculum director, or it could be a data person. So we want someone from the district to come. The next piece is we want to make sure that there is a building team lead that is not the principal. So it could be the assistant principal or dean of students, but we want it to be somebody who can say, yes, let's move forward with this. However, when we work on building that shared leadership, so there's that shared leadership that comes out from Nebraska MTSS, we want to make sure that the right people are at the table and those people have some say and some autonomy in making the decisions that we need to make for situations and just things to be better for students so we can have positive outcomes. Also, before the first workshop, we have 2 different opportunities for our leadership teams from the schools. The first one is we have a kickoff or MTSS kickoff Zoom, and that takes about an hour. And we talk about this very thing where who should be on the team, what does that look like? And it could be something like a couple leaders. We want as many of the content areas represented as possible. And then we also want those specialists at the table. So psychologists, speech language pathologists, counselors. If you would go to the next one. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. This is one of the things, previous years, there was a webinar that we had, we pre-recorded or recorded and we sent it out. But this is one of the things that we showed during that webinar is, or during that kickoff Zoom is these are some of the people that should be at the table when we're talking about that secondary MTSS team. Another part that we do is we do a team inventory activity. When I was at the middle school, I kid you not, I was on 3 different teams. That's a lot of my time. And so what we do with that team inventory activity is we make sure that we list or visually represent all of the teams, and we make sure that we're not doubling or tripling the work or replicating the work that we're doing in other teams, and making sure we're systematically and specifically working smarter, not harder. Okay, so we're maybe eliminating teams if we need to, or combining teams if we need to. All right. And then also before the first workshop, we actually come out to the school and we do that team inventory of who's on the team, and we make some adjustments if not the right amount of content areas are represented or leadership isn't represented. We want to make sure all the voices, or there are the correct voices at the table.
So we do these things, and we focus so heavily on who's at the table because we learn from experience. Our very first year, we had one team. They came to the first 2 days and they were like, we totally have the wrong people here. And then it was like, 7 new people had to be brought up to, it was just, so it is an investment in time to try to tackle something like this through the type of series. Or if you're going to do it right, whether you're attached to an ESU or doing this on your own, you have to make sure the right team members are at the table. The other thing that happens, and I know like stuff comes up, but if the building principal's not there, it's like no one feels like they can make a decision, right? And that's, I get it, because they are the captain of the ship there, the spaceship. Get it? But it's important that they are there. And then the district person too. That's the other thing, is we don't want it to be a district team. The team belongs to that school building, and it's essential that the MTSS team is from the building. But if you don't have that district leadership involvement and investment there, you might need resources, you might need support of something in specifically. So these are all lessons that we learned over time.
The other notion that we focus heavily on is that MTSS is not just another thing, it is a thing. MTSS is that process of school improvement. So using that data, looking at our data, there's that first question of, are we proud of that data? And then from that data, we use a problem-solving process that we adopted from the Nebraska MTSS model, but we break it down really systematically and over time. So from our data, we know that there are issues, there are concerns. What can we do over the process of a year, sometimes 6 months, maybe 2 months, but taking it slow and gradually easing into the problem, but coming up with solutions. We don't like to admire the problem. We like to stretch our minds, think outside the box, and we just like to say, hey, this is what's going on. What can we do as a team to fix this, or to help our kids, or to help our teachers? Yeah, that's it. All right.
So just overall on that myth number 1, that you can't get the staff buy-in, there's a lot of work. Like buy-in doesn't come cheap, but if you invest in it, that is, I think, one of the most critical things that you can do if you want to see this work like take off and be sustained, is you have to examine people's belief systems. And then it's like a whole nother story, figuring out how to actually practically, apply that and see behavior changes. But really, like Kayla just said, we do focus on this being the work. It's not another new initiative. I have to tell a funny story. One of the high schools I worked with jokingly referred to, oh my God, it's so, I said I wasn't going to cuss, didn't I? Shoot. But it's a funny story. So they had a POS, a pyramid of supports, but that's not what they call it. POS, right? Okay. See, I told the story without cussing. I'm super proud. So it's not just another thing we're throwing at them. It's not another thing on the plate. It is the plate. Okay. Second myth we want to tackle today. And I saw this up on our, when we got your responses. Yeah, secondary kids should know how to do this. Secondary kids should already know this. So I have a friend who says elementary teachers love kids, secondary teachers love their content, and college professors love themselves. That's draaronbradenkamp.com. So if he says that, and I think it's hilarious. But let's talk about it. Like a lot of times, you may have a teacher who's really passionate about their content, and so they might have this feeling that kids should have mastered all the prerequisite skills to be successful in school. Like they're 15 years old. They should know how to behave. How about that one, right? They should already know this. So that is a common theme and a myth we have to bust. So this is another like turn and talk. What do you think of, like, shouldn't students come to secondary having mastered the content and skills needed to be successful? Okay, ready, go. So I feel like we could probably spend a lot of time on this. And I think especially at the secondary, right? Has anybody felt like they've heard this at a secondary before? They should already know this. Okay. So But do we get to spend our time teaching the kids we want to have or the kids we actually have? And so I think it's an important reminder to our staff and our buildings that we're public schools. They, bring me you're poor, you're tired, you're hungry, and I will teach them English, right? I will teach them science. So it's an important concept to point out, but we spend a lot of time talking about, and she said it already, year one is tier one. So universal design for learning. They are not going to have all the prerequisite skills that they need to be successful in your class. And so the sooner we can come to terms with that, the better. Because then we don't spend our time admiring the poverty, admiring the lack of parental support, admiring the fact that damn middle school, oh, I did it. There we go. The middle school, didn't adequately prepare them, and don't even get me started on the elementary, right? So that's not our problem. Our problem is to teach the kids that we have, and it's an opportunity and a blessing. So we focus on things like universal design for learning, and we don't beat them to death with it, but we talk to them about it. We train them on it. Differentiation. And really, that tier one problem-solving team is, for all intents and purposes, your PLC at the secondary. How many of you have PLCs at your buildings? Raise your hand. How about department meetings? Similar, right? How many of you feel like those are the best use of time they could be? Okay. Yeah, that's the deal. And so making effective use out of those by focusing on tier one. So along the same lines, kids should already know it. There are ways that we can address in the secondary, even with the limitations we have. We are going to pay appropriate attention and time to the master schedule, I promise. But we can still do some things. So we focus on the things that we can do. What can we start doing tomorrow, right? So let's tighten up our tier one. Don't forget about the F word. What's the F word in this case? Thank you. But let's focus on that. We've had a lot of teams really dig into a useful walkthrough form that staff help the principal create. If they've all decided we're going to work on academic engaged time, we sit by their side. We help that team dig into this idea of what is it that we want to see when we come in. And perhaps it's not even observing the teacher during the walkthrough, it's observing the students. What are the students doing during this time? And then the principals are really on board with using that format. It's awesome. How about trying an extra scoop? So yeah, secondary's hard. We talked about that. You can't just change the schedule willy-nilly. I'm going to use that now. I haven't said willy-nilly in ages. You can't just change the schedule. So what about an extra scoop? That's a Judy thing. She says that all the time, and I love it. What are we teaching all kids? And then for a student who's struggling, how can we give them an extra scoop without completely changing their schedule or disrupting their day? So we talk about creative ways to do that. And then really, we focus on the classroom interventions, because you start pulling kids out of their core classes, and we know the research says that doesn't usually actually help them. It doesn't usually help them actually close the achievement gap. If you're pulling them out of regular English to do something separate and different down the hall, sometimes with someone who's not as thoroughly trained on English language arts. I'm a special ed teacher, but you know how many classes on teaching reading and writing I had in college? Take a guess. Yes, sir, one. I had one. So I think it's just important to remember the bang for your buck at the secondary is what you're doing in the core, what you're doing in the classes and the places that they're already scheduled into. And that's a mind shift. A lot of people come to MTSS trainings and sessions because they want to know what interventions to do. And I love that, and we'll get to it, I promise. But this is the bigger bang for your buck. When we think about kids already knowing it, we also talk a lot about not blaming the student. But they should know, right? They're practically, 18 years old. They should know how to do this. But we really need to get to the bottom of the issue. And if we're going to do that, we need a structure. So Kayla's going to talk with us about ISIL by Riot.
I get way too excited about this part. So part of our 4-step problem solving process is step 1, we identify the issue, but step 2, we diagnose the problem and figure out where it's coming from. There he is, the man in his greatness. Yeah, I know. Oh, somebody was, thank you. No, I'm not going to rap. Go forward. Thank you. So the reason we bring him up is because we ask educators to apply the ISIL by Riot method. And there's a link there in our slide deck that you can get that. So when we're diagnosing the problem, trying to figure out where the problem is coming from or the concern or issue is coming from, we really push our teams to go through a process of, is it part of the I? So I is instruction. C, is it the curriculum, or is it E, the environment? And when we come to the environment, it's not the student in the environment, it's the environment that the teacher provides, and it's the environment that the school provides. So it could be something like, are we providing the accommodations or the things that kids need so they can focus, right? Or are we providing our supports like graphic organizers or closed notes? Or are we doing all of the things that we can do for the kids to make sure they can be successful? The very last thing that we ask them to look at is the L, which is the learner. And then also when we kind of choose, so between instruction, curriculum, environment, and learner, to prove that process, we go through the Riot. McKayla, I don't remember what Riot is. Review. Oh, no, you do it.
Okay. So yeah, we're testing, we got a problem. We've looked at our data, we're not happy. We identify a problem we want to solve. We do the ISIL, right? We go through instruction, curriculum, environment, and then we talk about learner. And we use the Riot to test our hypotheses. And she's going to talk about this a little bit more, but long story short, ain't nobody got time to work on problems that aren't really the problem. We don't have time for that. We have to test our hypotheses. And this is how you do it. This is how we're training our teams to do it. Because you not only leave the learner for last, but you can use Riot, which is review, interview, observe, or test. And those go in order of least amount of work to most amount of work. Reviewing what you already have is kind of easy. Observing things that are happening. I'm sorry, I skipped I. Interviewing, like just asking questions, observing what's already going on, and then testing something new, like action research. But why spend all this time, addressing a problem that's not actually the source of the problem, source of the issue?
And one of the reasons that we do that, and one of the ways that we do that, is we we do talk about the twin example. Okay, so the twin example is, so I have a 9-year-old, her name is Sophie, and she's in 4th grade. And the twin example is, if Sophie had a twin and she was in a classroom across the hall, are they going to be doing the same activities today or similar activities? Are they on the same step for curriculum? Are the teachers following the pacing guides? Are they getting all the right supports to set them up for success? And if there's a mismatch there, then it is a classroom, teacher, or school-wide issue that we need to fix first before we can jump to the learner. Absolutely.
All right, we're going to talk about the master schedule. Does anyone, do you see anybody like twitching and, like just these images just strike fear into the hearts of secondary administrators. So here's the deal. Like, it's a real thing. The master schedule is a real thing. But saying we can't do MTSS because of the master schedule is no way to live. That's no way to live, right? There's so much we can do. So we have tried to address the master schedule throughout our work with school teams. Read this to yourself. It's almost poetic. The window to the soul. But like for real, it is. Okay. So we have to address the elephant in the room. We have to address the master schedule. So we do time our workshops with teams very strategically. We have 4 sessions in a year, 4-day-long sessions. 3 of them are before February. Because guess what? Guess what's pretty much set by February? Master schedule. And so if we wanted to do something different, let's say we did want to try something a little different, if it's past February, like it ain't going to happen. Master schedule is set. And I know some of you are working on larger cruise ships than others, but at the same time, it's hard. It's hard to make changes. So we talk about the master schedule at every single session. We give teams dedicated time to think about their schedule, their staffing, and address master schedule issues every single time we meet with them. Because it's that you have to pay homage to the master schedule. Okay. So one of the big things we talk about is student driven versus adult driven. So we want to use data and help our teams use data to address their master schedules. So I have 2 lists here, and I found a couple people who said they would be willing to help me out. So would you read the list on the adult focused side? So there's 2 types of schedules, adult focused or student focused.
Okay. Reflects the wants of the staff. Few or no interventions. All students are expected to complete courses in the same time frames. No double block classes. The strongest, most experienced teachers are teaching the top students. Best students are in the smallest classes.
Give it up for her, please. Come on, give us, yes. Sorry. All right, so on the student focus side, Jordan.
Reflects the needs of all students. Intensified instruction for all in both ends of learning spectrum. Opportunities for extension and remediation / support are built into the schedule. Strongest teachers are teaching the students with the most need. Teachers teach both higher level and support courses, and students most in need are in the smallest classes.
Give it up for Jordan. Thank you, Jordan. All right, so what I want you guys to do is think to yourself, what kind of schedule do we have? What kind of schedule does my building sound like? Student focused or adult focused? Does anybody have one of these that stands out to them? The students with the most need are in the smallest classes. Does that happen? Sometimes. Maybe. So that's a good reminder. So we also talk about optimizing your current schedule. All right. So let's say you can't blow up your master schedule. Not many places can. You have a fixed amount of FTE. You have course requirements for graduation or certain amounts of time to deal with during the day. Like time is a fixed it's a fixed condition, right? We only have so much time in a day. But what can you do? So do you have an advisory or a homeroom or a 9th hour or a win time, right? Spartan time, whatever it is that you call it. Do you have that? And how's it being used? Like, I've been in those classes and I used to teach them too. Like, are we maximizing that? Are we happy with our data? Are we happy with our data? So what can we do with some of those opportunities that are already there? Where are there already time in the day? What data do we have to support these decisions? And so some of the things that we talk about, we bounce around a lot of ideas because people have really specific, like I said, parameters around their master schedule, their staffing, the time of the day, that sort of thing. But if you're in a block schedule, we've had one of our teams that has instituted skinnies in their block. They were kind of limited to their block schedule, but they worked with some elective classes and some folks who were interested in signing up to provide some extra scoops of reading and math. And they created skinnies. Awesome. They're loving it, right? Team composition for middle school. One of our teams figured out, and it was through a master schedule discussion, that at their team meetings, which they had the luxury of still having, not the right people were there. They never had the right people at the team meetings. They had 45 minutes for team meeting. They spent about 32 minutes admiring the behavior problems on the team. And then they'd have another 5 minutes maybe to talk about what they were going to do about it, which really wasn't effective. But they didn't have the right people at the team. So they worked on that, made a change this year. Love it, right? How about, are you offering elective credit for interventions? How could you? What could that look like? Rolling schedules. Or how about when students take certain courses? I worked with a team and I thought the principal's head was literally going to explode. I was like, well, do all ninth graders like have to take biology? It has the highest fail rate of any class in your building. So what are we doing wrong? Like, do they have to? Right? So those really tough conversations are important. They're important to have. So take just a second here and read this. Read the Chinese proverb on the right. I'm really getting deep at this point. So, but here's my point. Like, you can't blow up your master schedule, but what can you do? Just start with something. Do something that makes it better than it was yesterday. Okay? So with that in mind, think about your master schedule and possibly talk to your neighbor about any of these 3 questions. Sorry, Kayla, I think this was your slide. Okay, optimize the time in your current schedule. Is there any wiggle room? Is there a target area that maybe you'd like to tackle? And guess what? Now's the time. If you want to do something for 23, 24, that's the right school year, right? Yeah, for next year. If you want to do something for next year, like right now is the time. All right, so talk to your neighbor about your master schedule and what you would like to see change. Ready, go.
Okay, let's bring it back in. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you. In regards to the schedule, I wanted to give you 2 ideas from the field that, as an administrator, we implemented. So I had a couple of teachers who really believed in interventions for kids. And during Pride time, it was Pride time for us, so their advisory time, I had a group of 3 or 4 teachers who would trade kids during advisement time according to what their readiness levels were for reading, language arts, or math. So, I mean, that's something to think about too. If you have a couple of teachers who are like, yes, let's do this, give them that autonomy and give them that time, all right? The other example I have for you is I had 2 wonderful math teachers who taught the same course at the same time. They also did the same thing, and they implemented between the 2 classes some flexible grouping. Brooke. So with flexible grouping, what they did is they used their NWEA data or the pre-ACT or ACT data, and they grouped the kids by either ability level or readiness level, or maybe it was just interest, okay? And so then they did lessons, or they did groups, or they did centers. And I know that at the high school level, centers and groups are non-existent. It's okay. We can do groups with them. Because what do they do in science? They have lab partners, they have lab groups. So why can't we do that in math or in language arts? Right? Okay, so just wanted to give you a couple of ideas. Myth number 4, secondary is just too big, too complex, a lot. There's a lot of kids. So what we do and what we lead with in this instance is we lead with the data. We run the data. We help our schools set up early warning systems, and we kind of take them through that step by step. We spend a whole afternoon or morning on early warning systems, and we help them set their threshold levels. We want them to have the data sets to say, hey, these are the kids that are at risk. These are the kids that we need to target. And then from there, create our interventions or create our supports. And if we don't have the intervention time built into the schedule, what can we do for kids individually. One of my favorite pieces, take your picture if you want to of this one, is building that early warning intervention system. We give schools a list, and it's not exclusive. We give them a list of indicators that might say that our kids are at risk or that our kids need a little bit of help, and we have them set their threshold levels. Now, do they set them pretty hefty sometimes? Yes, we have them run the data, and sometimes 50% of their kids are at risk or off track. Sometimes we set those too high. So yeah, so sometimes we have to recoach them in, okay, what can we lower? What can we compromise on? And then let's run the numbers. We also, I'm sorry. Oh, I forgot. Yes. Yeah. No, that's okay. And there's a couple of other pieces of data that we encourage as well. And those are those SEBL screeners if you have them. And then also just some tallies, because I was telling McKayla earlier that I remember when I was in elementary school, I was in the nurse's office quite a bit, but that wasn't because I was sick. It was because I had a lot going on at home. And so I don't think there's any harm of taking tallies on how many times kids are in the nurse's office, taking tallies on maybe counselor visits. You would have to, just consider what you can do in those areas, but we need to consider, I know Dr. Brown mimicked the whole child, but it is a whole child. We need to see what's going on with them socially, emotionally, because if they're not well enough to learn, we can't teach them, okay? All right, the next thing that we do is once our teams dive into that data, it becomes really personal for them. It really does. And then it shouldn't be a barrier to improving outcomes, because what we can do is focus on the kids who fall in those areas and create doable solutions. The other thing that we do is we focus on some tier 2 and some tier 3 things at the high school level, and we become really, really creative with them. And I want to give you one of my examples that I did at the middle school. So it requires advisory time. Sorry. Our administrative group got together every 2 weeks, and one of the weeks we were looking at our NWEA and NSCAS data, and we noticed there was this group of kids who were not doing so well in language arts and math. And as a leadership team, we all took 10 kids and we ran interventions with them in advisory. Yes, leadership team, okay, dean of students. And I come from a language arts background, and so I took 10 kids, 5 of them I saw on Wednesday and Friday, 5 of them I saw on Tuesday and Thursday, and I either taught or retaught concepts like at the 7th grade level, they're learning about figurative language, main idea and details, alliteration, all of those types of things. And I kid you not, we had 6 administrators doing this for 2 quarters. Those kids that were working for us and with us for 2 quarters scored 4 points higher on their end of year NWEA test. Okay, so was it evidence-based? What I was doing with them in the classroom was, because I was teaching and reteaching those skills, absolutely. But it worked, okay? So something ingenious that you can do, there's all sorts of opportunities. The other thing we kind of wanted to show you is from that early warning system, we have our teams start to run the data. So on the right-hand side is an example of what our teams start to run. So they'll put all the data together in a spreadsheet and do that conditional formatting. So if a score falls below such and such number, it'll automatically receive a color. And so what we're asking our teams to do is look for the yellows, look for the reds. What is a common theme behind what's going on with those kiddos, and let's look at that problem, or let's diagnose that problem. The other thing that we do is we recommend a problem-solving process or decision rules. So this is an IIP process. So it basically says we start with core, and if students are needing support, we move them probably into an intervention. After 6 to 8 weeks, we really reevaluate. We either intensify or detensify, is that a word? I don't know. Decrease the intensity of intervention. And, oh, what happened? Uh-oh. No cuss words. And the little known fact that I wasn't able to share, I think I have a worse potty mouth than McKayla. Yeah, you should have heard us before you all came in. There's a lot of F words and yeah. Okay. So we do recommend that process of, what do those interventions look like? What does it look like if they're showing progress or not showing progress? So that whole continuum of thing. Also, although we do have them focus on decision rules, the caveat is sometimes we have kids where it doesn't apply or shouldn't apply. Because if we get a kiddo in from a different district or a kiddo where things just haven't popped up until 9th grade and all of a sudden all the bells and whistles are going off, maybe we need to skip from core to tier 3 and do some wraparound services. Or we need to call a team meeting where we're bringing the student in, the parents in, some advocates in. Like, what do we need to do for those kids, because all of a sudden we're having all of these issues. So sometimes we need to skip those steps.
So you did it. This is the last myth. You guys are awesome. So just tell yourself you're awesome in your head. You are. Thank you for sticking with us. I know these are long sessions, but it did give us an opportunity to really dive into more content. So we're appreciative. The last myth that we try to bust as we support secondary teams in implementing MTSS is that it's just too complex. So yeah, it is. It really, really is. But all we need to do is eat that elephant. It's so gross. I hate saying that, but it's a great illustration. Eat that elephant one bite at a time. We schedule out meetings for the entire year so that the MTSS school leadership team is meeting every month. That in and of itself is like a big effing deal. I didn't say it. That is a big deal. So we plan it out for the whole year. And then we have some agendas that we try to stay on topic with, and we help facilitate that. And at RESU, with this series that we've been running, there's an MTSS consultant that's like the guide by your side. It just keeps you moving forward because it's tough. And the day-to-day operation stuff, it's real. And so keeping this at the forefront is important. We do a lot of inventories so that we can kind of think about what it is that we're already spending our time doing. And yeah, de-implementation, guess what? It's totally a thing. You can look it up. It's science. You can quit doing that doesn't work. There we go. And it's over. Thank you. But it's like you can stop doing things that don't work. So the inventorying the teams that you have, what instructional practices you're using, like how the day is spent. Look at that stuff. And if it's not working, give yourself permission to not do it anymore because it's just too overwhelming otherwise. We do a lot of targeted action plans. So we take that problem-solving model and we identify one problem. We just do one problem that impacts the whole building and we practice the process of problem solving. Okay, because most of the time it's not a well-oiled machine at the secondary level or in lots of buildings. And then we try to help them prioritize. So if this is our problem, what are our priorities as far as fixing it? And so we have this cool activity called Spend a Buck. It helps everybody prioritize what's most important because things are big and they're complex. But long story short, we, rinse, repeat, wash, rinse, repeat. Is that a thing? Okay. Yeah. Wash, rinse, repeat. You just have to keep doing it over and over again. So here is, this is super tiny, but you have it electronically. This is what we do for 3 years. We meet 4 times a year. We meet every month as a school leadership team with the guide by your side. And we work this process so that we can have some sustainable implementation. Because an expert speaker, Judy Elliott's amazing, and everyone loves to hear her talk, but at the end of the day, those little things that you do to make positive changes, that's what's going to sustain a change. That's where you're going to see the change from. And so you'll see things on here like 4-step problem solving process in year 1. And then you see it again on year 2. And then you see it again on year 3. We don't even talk about tier 2 and tier 3 until year 3. So it's just, you have to go, I hate that saying, go slow to go fast. No, it's real, especially when you're turning cruise ships. So here is the contact information for some of our staff at ESU 3. As always, we love talking about this work and we love working with secondaries. So it has been an absolute joy and privilege to spend the afternoon with you. We have 2 minutes left.